Welcome to Human Factors Cast, your weekly podcast for human factors, psychology, and design.
I almost forgot to record. What's up, everybody? It's episode 208. We're recording this live on June 3rd, 2021. This is Human Factors Cast. I'm your host, Nick Roome. I'm joined today across the internet waves by Mr. Blake Arnsdorff.
Hello, Nick and the internet waves. How are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm good. I know you're not great, so we'll get through this. Blake is a little under the weather. That's what's going on. It's not that he's not great mentally. He's great mentally, just physically. That's the problem, right? Anyway. What a start to a show, guys. Let's get into some programming notes. Follow up to last week. If you haven't already, check out our deep dive on how VR warps our perception of time. We do have a link on our website. We've been doing these deep dive follow-up, deep dive blog articles on some of the questions or some of the stories that we talk about on the show, because it's never enough for Blake and I to just sit here. They're fantastically written, and I say that not being the one that wrote them. They are a fantastic companion piece to the podcast. Please go check those out. As a reminder, we have opened up the Human Factors Cast Digital Media Lab. If you have any interest in that, it's a great opportunity for people looking to get involved with us. So these are students looking for real-world experience, academics looking to share your work, or designers looking to work on their portfolio, any of the above, or anything else that you might be able to think of. We might be able to find a fit for you behind the scenes here at the Human Factors Cast show. Yeah, go check that out. Anyway, we know why you're here. Let's go ahead and get into this first part of the show we like to call That's right. It's Human Factors News. This is the part of the show where we talk about everything related to the field of human factors. This could be anything from medical privacy, security, robotics, healthcare, or workplace things. What's going on this week?
So the realm of workplace things, Nick. So we have workplace pandemic protocols are impacting our employees' behavior both inside and outside of work. So let's jump into it. Employer COVID-19 safety measures influenced worker precautions even when they were not on the clock or at the workplace, according to a new study out of Washington State University. Study found that workplace cultures that adopted COVID-19 prevention measures, such as daily health checks and encouraging sick workers to stay home, resulted in less sick presenteeism, or going to work when you're feeling ill. The effect was both inside of outside of work, meaning fewer employees with COVID-19 symptoms would actually show up to work or go to other public places like the grocery store or gyms. The same actually held true for attitudes toward COVID-19 prevention measures recommended by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, such as mask wearing, social distancing. Employees working in companies with these strong guidelines and prevention measures were more likely to have positive attitudes towards CDC guidelines like wearing masks. So the workplace COVID-19 climate was shown to have a direct effect on shaping employee attitudes toward personal and preventative health measures and actions that the CDC was recommending, or so the study has shown. So public health officials and employees or employers should be aware of the impact that an organization and workplace can have on their employees outside of work. So it's not just employers having an impact on the transmission that occurs within the workplace, but they were actually influencing how people were going to act outside of work. So, Nick, this is really like a tie all the way back to just the psychology roots that you really think about when you think of human factors in some way. So, it putting specific measures in place to prevent one thing and influence behavior tangentially in another. But overall, first glance, what are your gut feelings here, or your thoughts?
First glance, yeah, it makes sense. And I think that, there's a lot of these stories that we're like, yeah, duh, makes sense. But if you think about break this article down, there's a couple things going on here. Mainly that the workplace culture carries on outside of your workplace. And I feel like that alone is worth talking about, because it's true. Like I've seen it in my own life. There's kind of this attitude that you take away from a certain type of culture that like if it's very, let's say there's two different types of cultures that I've worked in. There's kind of the laid back culture where actually three. Let's just say three. There's laid back culture where things can get done when they get done as long as they're done by the deadline. No one's really kind of upset about it. And then there's kind of the opposite where things are very driven. You're in an environment where you don't have a whole lot of room to fail. You don't have a lot of room to do the things that you need to do to work on the thing because of X, Y, and Z. Then there's somewhere in the middle where it's interesting because the culture of the people are laid back, but yet the culture of the office is very uptight and needs things yesterday. Those are three very interesting cultures, and I can imagine, well, I've experienced how that translates to the real world because, when I was working let's just say I'm working in the laid back culture now, and that's definitely pervaded my personal life. I don't feel as stressed about work, about things that are happening, except for this one instance, which I'll talk in my one more thing a little bit later. But I don't feel as stressed as, say, I would in another job. And I don't necessarily let's say I'm working on hobbies. If something happens in a hobby, I'm less likely to be uptight about that thing than I would be in another situation. Like let's say I'm creating something, right? Let's say I'm creating a control panel here for anyone watching on video. I'm creating a control panel. This has been like a static thing for the last couple months. I haven't felt like working on it, and I haven't felt driven to work on it as much, but that's also because I have a lot else going on and I'm giving myself a little bit of forgiveness. Now, I've made a lot of progress on it, you can see there, but it's not done, and that's okay. I'm learning to live with that. And if I was in another environment, I would need to get it done. Otherwise, I would feel unaccomplished. Anyway, that's my general take on it. How do you feel, Blake?
That you make me want to be much more introspective about how I'm approaching my outside of work life. I am definitely somebody who struggles with a work-life balance. I tend to stretch myself really thin, but there's definitely something to be said for everything you just went through, like talking about the various spectrums of work. So a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I worked in a very, very the way I've described it before is like militant leadership, where like I was clocking in. There was like I would have basically an executive secretary who would check on me every hour to see what my progress had been. Like my laptop was constantly monitored for the sake of KPIs. Like it's a very different experience that I had. And I found that I was a much more stressed and anxious person outside of work than I had ever been before. So it's interesting that you've kind of thought of and realized that the impacts it has to your other kind of stuff that you do outside of work or whatever it may be. Because if I go back and think about it, something that I probably didn't pick up on was I played a lot less guitar because I would get a lot more frustrated with music production, 5 years ago than I do now. Now, a lot of that has to do with kind of changes that COVID brought along as well, though, from like I've never had a remote job and suddenly most jobs turned into remote jobs. So it's definitely that has some impact as well on like my current experience in terms of workplace stuff translating to my everyday life, because in a lot of ways I'm more in charge of what my workplace does and how I respond to it than ever before. So I can imagine though, because like when you think of work, we spend so much time working, whether it's whatever job it is, you're spending some large amount of time in your week, contributing to it. And so culture becomes part of your everyday life, whether you're kind of really picking up on the nuance or not. But I definitely can identify with kind of practices that were put in place in my company's culture, as well as like practices for safety measures for COVID. Like it probably did have some pretty big influence on how I was treating the pandemic outside of work, and made me think more seriously about it for it impacting me being able to go to work and continue to work during the pandemic stuff. So I think, like you mentioned at the top, it's not directly simple to catch this kind of thing going on, but it does make intuitive sense when you start thinking about the logical implication of some place where you go all the time or some place you're involved with all the time, influencing your life outside of work in this case.
Well said. Yeah, I want to focus on what exactly does carry over, right? So we're talking about the specific sickness presenteeism, and when we think about this concept, it's largely how willing are you to go out when you're sick. That's kind of the gist of it, and we could talk about this specific study, but I just want to talk about your experience with the pandemic, like. And just generally, like when you feel sick, do you go outside or do you kind of do you power through it, go outside, do the thing that you need to do? Or like, do you take it easy and try to rest and try to get through it and tell work, buzz off, I'm trying to rest here and get better?
Yeah, it definitely depends. I think I have gotten a lot. I know, right? Where is that, it depends button for us?
It depends.
But I guess so. I've definitely gotten a lot better in the last few years about if I am sick, I know that the harder I go and push at work, the worse it's going to get, because I'm just one of those people that it takes a while to get through being sick or whatever it is. So I try to push work off. However, I do, and this article brings up a little bit of this, I do feel that, maybe ingrained stigma that not necessarily work has pushed on me, but societal pressures has pushed on me of it doesn't matter if you're sick, you should still go to work anyway and go get the work done. Like you're being paid. That's what you should be doing. So I feel a lot of anxiety when I get sick. It's just ironic that we're talking about this now. That when I get sick and I don't go to work, I feel like I'm letting my teams down, like the world's going to implode. All the simple, just falling apart world stuff that happens to me when I get sick, right? But I think COVID kind of changed some of that, because in instances like today, I got up, worked as long as I could before I just couldn't even stare at anything anymore and didn't want to take any more Advil for the day. And because of the remote capability, I was able to do that, to get stuff done, be sick, not be around anybody, and putting anybody potentially, not necessarily in danger of more than just getting a cold. But it was a way to kind of balance my anxiety, if you will. But what about you, Nick? I mean, because I've known you in a work setting. I have my perspective on what you're going to say, but what do you do in terms of when you think of this sickness presenteeism or going to work when you're feeling bad?
That's interesting. I'm interested to hear what you think I'm going to say, but I'll go ahead and say my thing. So, in a previous life, I would have gone to work when I was sick, and this is largely because of the demands put on me by the job. Things needed to get done. There was a lot of pressure to get the things done. There wasn't a lot of good structure in place to accommodate for those instances where somebody gets sick. I will say I switched jobs just before the pandemic started to a fully remote role. So my role already was remote by the time COVID-19 rolled around here in the States. And there was an interesting thing going on where I needed to get something done. And the pandemic was just starting to become a real threat, I guess. It was right before everything shut down. It was this growing awareness of this thing happening, and I was already weary. And I think it's largely because of the company that I work for. They were being overly cautious. There was an event that was supposed to happen a month after I joined. And it was a big event, lots of people all over the world. And it was right up to the line where they were like, no, we can't do this. And, it had to happen virtually. And I think because of that experience, I was less likely to feel obligated to, if I was sick, I could just basically say, hey, I can't today. I just can't. And being in a remote position, I feel like there's more forgiveness on people's parts because they understand that there are other things happening around you most of the time when you're in a remote environment. As long as you put in the hours and the work gets done, I don't think anybody really has a problem, or at least where I'm working at now, right? Where I'm working at now is pretty flexible in terms of work when you need to. Understand, you have a 20-month-old and he will need things at certain times of the day, and he goes to sleep at a certain time. So if you put in the work after hours, that's fine too, as long as the things that you need to do get done. And I think all that contributes largely to the ability I have to say, no, I don't want to go into work when I'm sick. I will say this also had a large impact on how I took safety throughout the pandemic, right? Like for me, I was one of those people that was very cautious because I have a small child that I have to care for. And at the time of the pandemic, he was like just over a year old. So he was younger than a year old. And it was this weird thing where it's like, we had this thing and I need to protect him. And so I'm taking every precaution necessary. And I think, there's a point where I actually needed to go somewhere during the pandemic early days. And, it was just after the mask mandate. And it was like one of those things where it's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to go do anything, but I need to do this because I needed to get my card on a certain system. And it had to be done in a physical location to get that done. And I needed to go interact with people. But, we made sure that it was only me and one other person, and that, they opened the door, and then, there was hand sanitizer kind of everywhere. And it was this intense protocol just to go to a computer, Lysol the thing down before all that. I think as a result of some of the actions that we, took early on as a company. So that's kind of where I'm at. Where did you think I was going to land with that?
I specifically remember an instance where I watched you push really hard to when you were feeling awful. So it's interesting that that's kind of changed in retrospect. And I mean, I think the pandemic made us all much more self-aware of that kind of stuff and the impact it could have on others. But for me, like I don't know if most of the audience knows this stuff. I have a few kind of weird conditions for my age. And so things like being able to work remotely when, I'm having rheumatoid arthritis issues or whatever, it's definitely changed my ability to, one, save ETO, but also the fact that, like, I know that if I start feeling much better, Friday evening or Saturday morning, I can work all weekend to make up time that I wouldn't have before because I didn't have a laptop. Remote working was not accepted, yada yada. So it's definitely one of those interesting changes in society in terms of just workplace culture affecting your outside perspective too.
Yeah, let's get into the study. I want to talk about this a little bit. You want to give us a little rundown here, Blake?
Yeah, so let's go over just the high level details. So for the study, the researchers surveyed more than 300 working adults recruited through the Amazon Mechanical Turk crowdsourcing website. And they did this in 3 waves. So they first surveyed workers back in 2020 October to assess the COVID-19 climate of their workplaces. Then again in December 2020 about their attitudes towards CDC prevention guidelines. And then finally in February 2021, another survey round about their work and non-work behaviors when sick or exposed to COVID 2019. So 3 different waves using just a survey through crowdsourcing tools. Pretty simple and straightforward, but obviously yielded some interesting results.
Yeah, I do want to mention that this was, so if you think about the time frame of this, right? October is right before major U.S. holidays. You have Thanksgiving in November and Christmas and other holidays in December. And you have February where all that kind of cools down. And so you have kind of 3 phases where what's before, what's during, and what's after the holidays, where people are probably most likely to be more susceptible to waiving those, I guess, values. If like family or friends are involved, I feel like during December and November, especially, there were probably a lot of people that didn't take the precautions that they needed to. And, we saw that big spike in early December and January, right? Because of it. And so it's interesting that they gathered all that data during this time.
Definitely a smart move in terms of seeing how people actually, reacted to the guidance at that point in time. Because this would be, height of people taking time off, being away from the workplace. And then now they're still trying to see how's that impacting your behavior in and outside of the workplace.
Yeah, so like ultimately, basically what they found is the headline, right? Basically the things that happen in the workplace, employee attitudes towards the pandemic itself, or these prevention measures specifically, like mask wearing or social distancing, that type of thing, and ultimately whether or not they showed up to work or other places while feeling ill, were basically um, driven by the work attitudes, right? So there's a significant connection between the workplace culture and their attitudes towards safety measures and going out when they're not feeling great. I mean, I have a couple extra things that we can talk about here, Blake. But I mean, is there anything else about the study that you want to bring up?
I think about this. So here's something I actually want to go back and forth with you and I on, because you have a different remote experience than I do. But let me relate it to the study. So just want to bring up one of the points. So they talked about the one interesting aspect of this entire kind of study is that remote workers were even influenced by their workplace's culture, or how the workplace was handling COVID-19 in terms of like safety measures, whatever it may be. So for you and I, it is pretty different because you had a remote job already. I think a lot of my kind of dealings with how the company was going to handle COVID-19 measures really hit me the most when I would go into the office. So I would have to go in for random things that are part of my job, and like having to go through the process of taking my temperature, signing a piece of paper that's basically like binding that I came in and don't have COVID symptoms. Like, it was a lot. It freaked me out. It made it hard to like go in and actually do the work I was supposed to be doing in the office. So then it made me, I think, in hindsight, much more cautious as I went to the grocery store or like going out anywhere from beyond my apartment complex. But for you, how did your kind of workplace, I don't know how you would even put it, how their kind of like reaction to COVID, did it impact you in any way, or was that just really you already had the remote job, so it was really you just putting in your own safety measures in place for you and your family?
That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because so what happened early on is they took, just because I'm remote, there's a physical office, and people still worked out of that physical office at the time I joined remotely. And so, once everybody went home and was doing remote work, there were opportunities to go into the office, kind of like you described. I'm far away from the office. It was not happening. It's on the other side. It's on the other side of the country. And so I wouldn't go into the office anyway. But whenever somebody did go into the office, it was shared with a couple extra businesses. And whenever a case came up or a potential exposure, even like the slightest mention, like, hey, someone coughed, we got to shut down the office for 2 weeks. Like that's the kind of, like, no one goes in. We're going to send in a hazmat team. Like, that's the level that we're talking about there. Don't use the elevators because they may have pressed the buttons. If you need anything, let us know. You got to sign papers like you described, right?
Yeah.
It was one of those things. And I think seeing all those emails come through, I mean, not that I ever didn't take the pandemic seriously, but it also, kind of hammered home the severity of it. Like, wow, yeah, like, this is serious. Like, again, not that I ever thought that it wasn't, but I think part of that obviously transferred, right? And like
Absolutely.
I said, I had to do that instance where I had to go somewhere and do something during a pandemic early on when we didn't know. It was very scary. No one knew what was going on. Disneyland was shut down. What's going on? And so it was one of those things where we didn't quite know what to do. It was just two people. It was me and somebody else, and we did our best. And there was no thermometer, there was nothing like that. But it was
Sure.
one of those instances where we were both kind of freaked out about it, and so we're like, "Hey, is this cool if we both wear masks and all that stuff?" It was, So that's my experience.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure. But I guess like the major finding here to also that we can kind of go back and forth on, or the big applicable takeaway, is that the researchers really were harping on and noting that many U.S. organizations have long-standing cultures, like I talked about earlier, of stigmatizing sick leave and encouraging people to still come to work when you're sick. And it looks like, based off of the research that's done here, is hopefully by this helping to put all these workplace culture aspects of curbing COVID-19 in place, that may relate to how people treat just being sick and coming into the office in general, or at least that's kind of the goal here of trying to understand how workplace culture is affected in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I mean, if you think about like physical jobs that couldn't stop working because of the pandemic, right? Healthcare workers had to go in, and I'm positive that they have a long-standing culture of promoting stay home when you're sick. I bet you those attitudes transferred over, and I bet you there are I can definitely see it where some of those other organizations that did stigmatize the sick leave, like, you got to get this done, it's your responsibility. I can definitely see those kind of struggling with this too. And people struggling with it, especially if their workplace culture is like that. I do have a couple points that I want to bring up here. Or I guess they're more phrased as questions, and we can kind of talk about them. But some questions you might be having, like, how can we increase sort of these acceptance of these health measures to continue decreasing this sickness presenteeism? Like, what can we do? Let's talk about the application here. What can we do to encourage some of those pro-social, pro-health behaviors or pro-health workplaces, right? This is a tough question. I don't necessarily have a great answer for it, but what do you think?
Yeah, it's hard. I think it comes down to like a leadership thing in some ways, and like creating policy and guidelines that way in terms of like trying to ingrain it somewhere. But if you don't feel comfortable like in your workplace, not working or not coming to work, whether that's remote or not, working when you're sick, that's just always going to be an issue unless like overall leadership is okay with the fact or has planned their projects in a way that you're not a single point of failure or whatever it may be. But I think it comes down to, in a lot of ways, communicating that to your entire company. And that comes, I don't think that's necessarily from my limited perspective, right? That's not like on a project to project or team to team basis. That's like a larger corporation needing to get that message out there, putting it in their guidance or handbooks or whatever they put out to continue that along. Because I think some of these measures will stay in place for the interim, right? As you see more people doing in-person meetings and all that kind of stuff. So the visual consequences of COVID-19, so seeing people still in masks and, still distancing from each other in smaller workspaces, I think that will continue to, get people to stay away from work if they don't feel good. But like in 6 to 10 months time, what's different? I'm not really sure, unless companies are actively trying to put this stuff into their own work culture and trying to get rid of the stigma itself of like, okay, COVID's over, let's go back to how things were in 2019, and let's just, work through the pain and the sickness and suffering and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what the best options are. I think there will still be lingering effects, though, from COVID itself to help try and push us towards like, don't come to work when you're sick.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree that right now leadership is probably the one sole way you can do it. However, there are ways that you can negotiate that, especially as employees, right? Start a labor union with your company. This was, the big fight against Amazon. Like, we want to unionize so that way we don't have to pee in bottles while we're in our trucks. Like, that's the level that they're talking about, and it's unsafe, unhealthy. And if you have a labor union, you can negotiate with management and say things like, hey, we don't want to have to feel this pressure when we are feeling ill. Is there anything, like, here's X, Y, and Z solutions that might help that, and we want you to implement them, and you have to do it because we say so. We're the labor union. And so that's kind of the larger structural change that needs to happen in order for the people to rise up and take control of their environments. But I agree, right now it's kind of in leadership's hands, and if you don't have a great leader or someone who encourages pushing through that pain, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult. You want to take this next one?
Sure. So next kind of question point we've got here. So will this this entire workplace change lead to an increase in working from home, especially if people are feeling like they might be sick, but maybe well enough to work? I certainly hope so. And I hope that it's definitely a cultural thing that companies will accept. Although I don't know how it's actually going to pan out over time, because even some of the larger corporations that during COVID-19 were the early companies to say like work from home for the rest of the year before it became kind of the norm. Even they're trying to bring people back into the office, and I think there are certain aspects of jobs like doing R&D stuff, whatever it may be, you have to kind of be in a physical space, and sometimes. But I think allowing this option I think it's hypercritical for some of these companies to continue succeeding, because there is, and I know you'll touch on this later on, but there is this whole culture that's kind of evolving. It's like, well, if you're not going to let me work remotely, or I was able to do that successfully for a period of time, even if it was due to, outside circumstances, it fit my lifestyle better. So this is what I would rather do. So although I don't know if this will happen everywhere, I would say there's a large amount of companies that are going to have to deal with people wanting to negotiate this into their work life, being able to work remotely at least X amount of days a week, or if I'm not feeling well, being able to work from my laptop or whatever. But I mean, from your perspective, Nick, what do you think do you think this is going to be a long-standing thing for some people, or is it just going to be like short-lived as COVID kind of disappears?
Yeah, I hope so too. I think a lot of companies had to relax their strict stances on you're only working when you're in the office, and I think that's going to go a long way for allowing people to, if not work from home all the time, at least be able to, put in a couple hours so they don't feel like they're losing a lot or feel like they're still doing the thing that they want to do. Like, there are people that feel super passionate about their jobs, and they will probably still want to work when they're sick, but they don't want to expose other people to that sickness. And so allowing them to stay home, and I got the sniffles, I don't want to give everybody in the office, this big mega corporation that I work for, I don't want to spread a cold through it. Like, let me just work from home today or tomorrow or through the week that I need to stay home. And what does that do? Well, I think companies are stupid if they don't go with it, because then it's like, well, you've just saved health of a bunch of your employees. That it's not going to slow everything down to a halt. Things are going to get done. And, there's lasting effects that go on with health problems. If you feel like you can't rest and get over something, it might lead you to fatigue, which impacts your performance at work. There's a bunch of other things going on here. And maybe we'll jump into those in the deep dive: fatigue, performance, that type of thing when you're feeling ill and are at work. But, I do want to touch on one more point here, is that we've kind of seen this impact that COVID has had on basically the world. Like, what does this look like when you step back and prioritize your mental health, or basically, I want to live my life and not feel, I don't know, beholden to a company? What kind of shift this will have on culture? Like pulling back. So I think there was a story that came out the other day, basically that said, people who are working remote would rather quit their job. Like a significant portion, I think it's like 30% of people would rather quit their job than go back to a hybrid scenario where they are working in the office and working remote, or just working in the office. They'd rather quit because it's been so good for their mental health. And I think there are other ways that you can other things that you can lump into this, like the 5-day work week. Is that still going to be a thing? I mean, I know you have a book that you like to plug called, what is it, the 3 or 4 day work week or something?
Yep. 4-hour work week.
Yeah, there you go. 4 hours a week. So, I mean, I think there's a cultural shift happening too. And I think companies have to wisen up to understand that the workers that they're looking for are not going to want to work for them unless they relax a little on what they're requiring. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a need to take a step back and really assess. So there are definitely aspects of some jobs that you need to be in a space to do them. You need to be on a factory floor for some of the tech you might be working on, or if you're building a physical product, you may need to be able to actually access that physical product. take beta test home with you or whatever it may be. But I think the mental health thing's a big deal to me specifically. And I know it is for a lot of people, and for some people, working from home is just not an option. They just don't like it. And I know I've come across a couple of friends who, like, they ended up, coworkers quit their jobs completely because they couldn't work from home. They just couldn't figure out how to make it work in their head. They had to be in an office. So there's different types of people. But I really do think it is the case, and I've talked to a few people over the past month about this, is companies do have to be a little bit more open, because there's a lot of companies that are big that have moved to this remote culture now and don't have a problem with it. And they're looking to bring in now more talent. So now that we're seeing a lot more remote jobs, you've got to kind of weigh the pros and cons for, like, do you need to be remote? Do you need to have somebody on site in a building? Can you continue to grow at a rate that you wouldn't be able to in your current space by going remote? There's just a lot of factors that are worth taking into account. But I personally think a lot of, like, bigger tech companies, people that do human factors or UX work, are going to be looking for remote style jobs because of what the last, over a year has kind of resulted in. And ultimately, I think it comes down to, was the company still be able to be successful when it was remote? And if you can answer that question, that might help kind of guide principles and things that you put in place as you go forward.
Yeah, lots of benefits to working remote. All right, well, I just want to thank our patrons this week for selecting the topic, and thank you to our friends over at Washington State University for our news story this week. If you want to follow along, we do post the links to the original articles in our blog, as well as our Slack and Discords as we find them. So join us over there for more discussion. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to see what's going on in the human factors community.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.
Yes, huge thank you, as always, to our patrons, especially our honorary Human Factors Cast staff patrons, Michelle Tripp. Patrons like you keep the show running, and thank you all so much for your continued support. I don't think people realize Patreons are the ones that keep the lights on over here. Like, we have a lot of stuff that we use, and, it takes a lot to keep the show up and running, and truly, we couldn't do it without you. So thank you. We have a couple ways in which you can help out. There's a couple different options for you, like the commercial said. We also have a show sponsor role, so if that's something that you want to do, you can only one show sponsor a month. So, if you want to hop on that, that's if you need to reach a bunch of human factors professionals, that's your place. With that, I think we should get into the next part of the show. Blake,
let's do it.
It came from.
That's right. It came from. We got Reddit this week. This is the part of the show where we search all over the internet. That graphic is so stupid. I'm sorry. We search you all over the internet to bring you topics the community is talking about. Any topics, fair game, as long as Blake and I can talk about it. So that's the criteria, and it relates to human factors and professional development, all that stuff. We have 3 up this week. Why don't we just go ahead and jump into this first one? How does ownership work at your company? This is written by Symphonica on the User Experience subreddit. They go on to write, I'm a junior UX designer who's been working at a large tech company for nearly a year now. Since joining, I've been confused and frustrated about how to own a project. My company has a lot of overlap between teams, which creates some confusion about who should own an initiative. They go on to write an example. I'll say the example. I think it's worth it. For example, a few months ago, I identified a big gap in our product that customers were complaining about, not having a page to view upcoming events. So I worked on some concepts, got some feedback from other designers, and presented it to the PM. She scoped my page way down to a tiny list that's now ham-fisted onto another page in our product and designed by someone else. A new designer recently joined that PM's team, and she has my same idea of having a separate events page, and the PM now seems to support it, which is great for the product, but also a bit frustrating since I had to go since I wanted to own designing that experience, as I've been stuck working on smaller projects. Also, because I'm on the events team while this designer is on the invite list team, I'm curious on how ownership works at other companies. Do you get assigned projects from your PM? Do you need to take initiative and ask for work to work on projects? How do you advocate for working on exciting projects? Blake, how does this work?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I feel like I'm in a weird position for this, mainly because I am the lead UX designer, only because I am the only UX designer on most of my projects. That's changing a little bit now, but a lot of times for me, it's fulfilling the design role. So it's not so much about what actual like piece am I working on. It's like I'm working on the whole thing for 2 projects. So I have a little bit less experience in terms of how it's doled out in larger companies. However, I will offer some thoughts and insights because I've had questions trying to figure out how do I become a better design leader, and how does this work at bigger companies who have, very structured approaches, or they set their product teams up completely differently and they have a lot more collaboration. So I've talked to a few friends that work at larger companies, and the biggest thing that I have seen in terms of a commonality is being vocal about things you would like to do. And that means talking to your PM and actually trying to get a sense of, hey, I want to own something. What is there that's coming up that I can do? And it sounds like in this case, it's definitely worth having a conversation with your PM about the idea that you brought forth, even bringing up the concept of you watched another designer kind of create a similar concept, and want to understand like what you could have done better in terms of trying to take ownership or moving to a new design team. Because it sounds like you may just want to work on something different than what's in your kind of like business or product area right now. So I think having open dialogue with your management, even asking other designers about how their tracks and how they present their work to their PMs may be helpful as well. Because getting diverse perspectives on this kind of stuff can help you figure out the best route for you to figure out how to grow and kind of keep moving forward. And for exciting projects, I mean, I think the biggest thing there is kind of like showing interest when they come up and, trying to figure out how to get your foot in the door, talking to teams that are working on them, talking to the developers that work on stuff, just really trying to get your foot in there. But Nick, from your perspective, like, what does it look like taking ownership for something?
Ah, geez, I struggle with this so much. I struggle with trying to answer this. I'll try my best. So I think there's a couple pieces of context here that I'm missing in the sense of how your excitement was communicated. I think excitement most of the time gets communicated by body language. So if this was an email that you sent to your PM saying, hey, I think this thing could work, versus a physical conversation where you were like, hey, we really need to do something about this because users keep bringing this up. There's a very different way of approaching that problem. I think communication is key. And I think especially when you can communicate in person or over video where somebody can see that visible excitement that you get about a project, can really come through. Now, I've had this happen to me where I've presented an idea and at the time it wasn't accepted, and then somebody else brought it up and then it was accepted, and I'm left going, what the heck? Like I did this a couple months ago and it was not accepted then, and now it is. And the other person's getting credit for it, and that sucks. That really sucks. But I think the only way to get through that is to say, work it strategically into the way that you communicate about a thing. Be like, No, you're absolutely right. That is a great idea. And actually, I did a lot of preliminary work a couple months ago. Would you like to see it as a great place to start with this? So you bring in your experience into that thing and make yourself invaluable to it. Even if it is a side project, be like, hey, I started to notice this a couple months ago, and here's X, Y, and Z. Come to the table with it. If you're really excited about something, then do your due diligence. I don't know. In terms of working on exciting projects, I don't know. I also struggle with that one because it's like I've tried to push my way onto exciting projects, and maybe they weren't so exciting when I got there. And I'm kind of like in the enjoy your scraps peasant camp right now. Like, look, the market out there is weird. And so it's like, if you're picky, then you might not have a job, but then also you don't know what you don't go for. What am I trying to say there? It's like you don't know what you can do until you try to get it. Anyway, that's
pretty much, yeah. I mean, just get there, see what it looks like.
I mean, yeah. I have a colleague who just got accepted to a very prestigious company, and it sounds like a ton of fun, and I'm really excited for them. And I'm not going to call them out on the show, but I am very excited about what they're going to do. Let's just say they are working for a large company, and they are doing some really cool things. Let's say it's my dream job. So very excited for them, and they didn't know if they were going to take it because of a couple factors, but they applied to it because they didn't know that they would get it, and they ended up getting it. So anyway, that lesson of the story: just go for things. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
Try
you never really know where you're going to end up.
That was a mess. All right, why don't we get into the next one? This one I feel like I can talk about. How do you gently push back on clients demanding too much? This one's from numnumcookiie on the user experience subreddit. Hi, I'm generally a very blunt person that just graduated and started working as a UX designer at a corporate. When I need to push back, I just say something on the lines of, no, this is not possible for X, Y, and Z reasons. Obviously, I've received some flack because of this and earned the reputation of being rude, which I totally understand. However, I am looking to change it, and I would love any examples, information, or courses that can help me improve. Thanks in advance. Blake, how do you gently push back on clients demanding too much?
Tactics here. So this is awesome. This sounds like somebody who recognizes not an issue, but they recognize a character trait they have. Seems like they're in a job or in a setting that doesn't react well to that. So this is great. This is somebody who has a lot of self-awareness and wants to kind of change the way that they're tackling something. I think the biggest part here, I'm making a lot of assumptions about this person, so forgive me on that side, but I think a big one is going to be being prepared to hear something and you're going to have a gut response to it, which may be correct because a lot of times you'll know like there's no way we have scope to do X, Y, and Z. This doesn't make any sense. But it's kind of being ready and gut checking yourself when you start to hear yourself make that sound of, no, for 1, 2, and 3, we definitely can't do this. There's no way to handle it. And you got to think about how to present that strategically to your stakeholder, your team, whatever it may be. And sometimes that goes back to pulling up and zooming out to the project plan, and really tying it to specific milestones that you guys have left. So saying like, okay, these ideas are valid. If they are, provide rationale if they're not. But let's say all the ideas brought to you are valid, but the timeline is just not there. There's no way to get it done. So you would have to present the fact that some things would have to come off of the table in terms of what's going to be your MVP, let's say, if you want to go down this route of doing the new X, Y, and Z feature. And so it just becomes more of a practice of how you present yourself and your kind of rationale for why something can't fit in the design scope right now, but also being open to saying like, we could do this, but we would need to do this in a larger time scale, or we would need more money to be able to pull this off. So I think the good thing here is this person's gut instincts may be correct, but in terms of how they're presenting, positive solutions to what people are asking of them, that's really where they'll have to spend a lot of time kind of figuring out how to present that stuff. And that comes with time, because you work on more projects, you understand how to rescope them, you understand what the trade-offs are of doing different features at different times based on time, budget, and development, all that kind of stuff. But Nick, how do you kind of push back when demands get a little bit too high?
Yeah, that's a skill. I think what you said is great, right? Like slow yourself down, don't respond immediately, let it marinate for a little bit, make people feel like they're heard. Don't I feel like there's two approaches to this, right? There's one okay, there's one jumping in immediately and calling somebody out when somebody says, "We need to do this because," and before they even get onto the because, someone calls them out, right? Cuts them off,
Yeah.
calls them out. We can't do that, XYZ. There's the second approach where you listen to somebody's entire thought process and then you say XYZ. That's a little bit more helpful. People tend to think of themselves as really important, like podcast hosts who just want to have a podcast to talk about things every week. Anyway, point is, people feel heard when they're allowed to complete their thoughts. And so maybe just say it afterwards. Now, there's a third approach that I'm going to suggest here that's worked for me, and your mileage may vary, but I've had pretty good success with this. If something needs to be done, or this, whoever says, a client says something needs to be done, then ask questions. How might that work? How might that work? Like, what do you think is the right solution to that? And maybe they themselves will back themselves into a corner and be like, it's not possible because of this. Okay. All right. And I think that's probably the most tactful approach, is to ask them questions that allow them to get to that conclusion on their own. That doesn't make you come off as a rude person. It makes you come off as an inquisitive person, and perhaps someone that is considering all angles without being rude, right? You're simply asking questions about how that might be done. And, if you reverse logic them into thinking, okay, no, it can't be done, then you've won. I consider that a win. Now, there's also, like, if you're talking to clients, there's also what's on paper for you're expected to do. And in most cases, unless you're a freelancer, in which case is a little different, but in most cases, you have some protection for that role. There's either somebody that will go back to the negotiating table with them and say, I think that's a great idea. Let's check with so-and-so to see if we can add that to the work. And they will negotiate on your behalf to keep it the original thing, right? You tell them in private that don't adjust this. This is not what we're on the hook for. In a lot of cases, you have that protection. If you're a freelancer, I don't know what to tell you other than, hey, like we agreed on this. I'm happy to talk about what that scope might be like if we were to pursue that route. I think that's two ways of going about it.
Yeah, if you're a freelancer, talk to other people that are freelancers. Get really good at writing contracts, because that will help you a lot, and then you can rescope stuff as you need to.
Yeah, Blake, let's save this other one for next week, and let's just get into one more thing. This needs no introduction. This is just one more thing where we talk about stuff going on in our lives. Blake, what do you got? What's going on with you?
All right, this is random and odd, but so I think it was last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago. I don't remember when it was. Last time we did a podcast, I talked about like how awesome I was or how awesome I thought Google's AI designer patterns library was.
Ooh, the follow-up.
Yeah, and I was really stoked. Like, I can't even tell you. I sat on that website, went through so many things. I'm going through their machine learning course right now because it's just a thing I'm interested in and know zero about. But this is kind of the flip side of all of that stuff. And this is a thing that I don't know. It came into my email box randomly, so I wanted to talk about it and just throw it out there so people are aware of it and voice my own concern. I'm just a guy who wants to be heard on a podcast, I guess. But so Google is, like a lot of companies, they're throwing a lot of money into artificial intelligence development. It seems like that is going to change the world completely. It's going to change the technology landscape as we understand it. But with, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say the Spider-Man thing. But with that kind of really intense new technology that some people like Elon Musk are not even really sure about, or government officials are kind of concerned about, there needs to be some people behind it that are paying attention and doing the research and saying like, that's dangerous from an ethics standpoint, or just basically keeping technology in check. And so most companies have either an ethics set of ethics standards. Google definitely does. We've talked about it on the show before. And they have committees that are focused only on doing research that focuses on the ethics of AI development and how it will eventually end up in products. However, Google has recently fired and then lost some of its main principal researchers in this AI ethics group. And I thought that was odd because the reason for why one of the main researchers was fired all comes down to a paper that was written. Now, Google, I don't know if you know this, Nick. I certainly didn't know how much they put into research, but they put like multiple billions of dollars into research for AI, for anything. And so they have lots of money that's tied into research stuff. They don't have to release all the papers that they write or all the stuff that they all the research they do. They don't have to make publications out of all of it. But I found it really disturbing that this particular researcher was, a big in the community of AI research, which I know nothing about, to be completely fair about it. But the fact that Google would not release whatever this paper was that was so condemning that they decided they needed to fire the researcher, it just concerned me because I'm a big proponent of Google's products. I know a bunch of people that work there, and I enjoy the company's kind of ethos that it puts out into the world. But me knowing so little about AI, it became concerning to see that there's a way that we may not be getting all the research shared with us out in the ether or whatever it may be. That some of these companies may be afraid of some of the results that they're getting from whatever kind of ethical studies they end up doing. And I just thought it was something that would be worth making other people aware of to learn more about what's going on in terms of ethical design, whether it's machine learning or AI or whatever it may be, and paying attention to that over the next 5 to 10 years, because I think it will have a large impact in how that technology kind of develops and the products we start seeing that come out from it.
Yeah. Would you say Google is not making human factors accessible?
I do want to be clear. I think based off what I've read and the digging that I could do, it is unclear to me, just some simple dude that has a human factors background and does design. It is not clear to me what's actually going on. It's just clear that they're not going to release a paper, but there's not enough specifics for me to say like, ooh, Google's doing something scary or bad. It's like, right. No, they're not going to release a paper for whatever sets of reasons. Things seem cloudy around it. And they're having a hard time figuring out, like I think a lot of other companies are who are probably not getting press over it at the moment. They're trying to figure out how the hell this is all going to work. How do we keep ethical design in the research that we're doing so that, one, we can compete in the business landscape, so that we can be the first people to reach the AI summit, get it into our products. But how do we do it in a way that's not going to create biased, AI systems or create, privacy issues? I think it's a giant ball of wax to try and solve. And we're kind of seeing the throes of it at the moment in a large company.
Yeah. Great. One more thing. For me, this frustrating experience, I mentioned it in the pre-show. I want to mention it here. So we have tickets for a convention that we thought we would be here in town for, but we're moving now. And so it's Star Wars Celebration Anaheim 2022. And first off, there's a whole bunch of frustrating things about this convention. It's supposed to be held this year, and then they pushed it to next year, and then they moved it up next year. So they moved it 3 times already. I have our tickets, and they were very expensive. I think they were something like $400 each or something like that, because it's multiple days. Anyway, hotel reservations went live today, and they have this virtual queue where you get in line, you wait, you get in. It wasn't live until noon. However, people that purchased higher tier tickets. So there's like the Jedi Knight ticket, and then there's the regular tickets. They got in earlier. Anyway, we had everything ready to go. We got in, and we wanted to get from, this day to that day, and it would only let you reserve for the days of the convention. So we wanted to pad it with 1 day on either side, and they would only let you do the specific days. So it was very frustrating. And then the hotels that we wanted specifically were gone. And there's people who only have tickets for 2 days or 1 day or something like that. And I feel like this would have been a much better process if they had done something like, okay, everybody with 4-day passes gets in at this time. And then 2 hours later, everybody with 3-day passes gets in at this time. And then, kind of gated it that way. And so it's very stressful because we have like our tickets. We don't have a hotel. We don't have a plane. Everything's kind of still in limbo, and we're still planning on tacking a couple days on, which means we have to get a different hotel, for those extra days. Just the whole thing. It's really dumb that they couldn't figure this out, and conventions need to figure some stuff out. Anyway, human factors behind that was terrible. That's my one more thing for this week. And that's it for today, everyone. Let us know what you guys think of the news story this week. You can hang out with us on our Slack or Discord, or get in touch with us on any of our social channels. Visit our official website, sign up for our newsletter, stay up to date with all the latest human factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, leave us a 5-star review. Tell us your friends about us, or consider supporting us on Patreon if you can. And as always, links to everything, all our socials and all the website stuff will be in the description of this episode. Mr. Blake Arnsdorff, thank you for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to talk about BS convention sign-up things?
If you guys want to talk about BS convention sign-up things, you can always find me across social media at Don't Panic UX, or inside of our Discord at Blake.
As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me streaming on Twitch Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific time for office hours, and social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks again for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time,
it depends.